Welcome back. We're still looking at the implications for Jamaica of advancing satellite technology. Still with us, we have Dr. Louis Ray Harris, lecturer in the Faculty of Science and Technology at the UWI-Mona, and Professor Norman Fitzcoy, Associate Professor in the Department of Mechanical Aerospace Engineering at the University of Florida. Dr. Harris, let me start with you. So help us to understand, because, and specifically as it relates to our telecommunications infrastructure here in Jamaica. How prevalent is this satellite technology here in Jamaica? Because we're accustomed to, you mentioned earlier, fiber and that kind of a thing. How prevalent is satellite in our telecommunications landscape here in Jamaica?
Okay, so satellites are relatively, but they've been part of the telecom infrastructure for a very long time as the backbone, especially going back to the, the 70s, 80s, where essentially that was the direct feed. We had with earth stations bringing the information into the island, and then terrestrial links are essentially what would distribute, in a sense, the information throughout the island. Then there's the onset of VSATs, or smaller dishes that allowed communication, or direct communication with entities, between entities and other entities in other countries via satellites. So it has been around for a while. However, you'll find that most of the mobile communication networks rely on links between base stations, and mobile phones. There is the backbone is really land-based for the most of the mobile communications as it is now. But the link, to get a link to the outside world or to other countries, yes, satellites definitely does play a part. It's not the only approach, because there's submarine cables, which are really fiber cable that run under the oceans, running thousands of miles between continents. But there's some amount of redundancy that's provided when there's satellites involved.
So the Starlink project is talked about in the U.S. If that project is to be introduced in Jamaica, what do you make of that project being introduced here in Jamaica?
Well, just maybe for the benefit of the viewers, Starlink really is first a constellation of satellites that is being developed, or has been developed, by the company SpaceX. Starlink's goal is to put over 2,000 satellites in what we call a low Earth orbit. That's an orbit that is about, well, low Earth orbits go from about 400 to 1,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Now, the reasoning behind this approach is to try to flood the globe with broadband internet connections. So the idea is really to pack as many satellites or relays into that orbit that will allow everyone, everywhere, to get good coverage. When satellites, the further apart they are, the more will be the gaps in the coverage area. So it's similar to the concept of a cellular technology on land, where the further apart the cell towers are, the more likely there will be gaps or areas where there'll be drop calls and poor coverage. So the idea is to really do what we call densification, increase the density of satellites in space, in that orbit, so that there's ideal coverage worldwide.
Professor Fitzcoy, I want to hear, what's the conversation in the United States about this particular project? What has been the experience?
Well, unfortunately, I can't say much to you about what's happened there, because that's not what I'm interested in. So I don't really know the day-to-day of the Starlink system. What I can say, though, is that on the flip side of what Dr. Harris just said, is the more stuff you put there, the more debris you're likely to create, and that is a very, very interesting problem that is showing its colors right now in space. There is a major concern about these large constellations that are being proposed by Starlink and several other companies, by the way, that are proposing these things. Space is quote unquote big, but it's It's not infinite. So there is a bit of connectivity between the different assets that are there that one needs to be aware of. And that's a major issue that we're working on right now.
So what is the danger? You talk about the debris out of space. What is the danger? What is the likely impact of this debris? When you sound wary of it in your description just now. Why are you hesitant?
And we should. The reason being, you know, think back in the days when we had few cars on the roads. The likelihood of collisions was not the sort of stuff we're seeing right now when there are more cars on the road. And that's literally what you'll have in space. You have a whole lot of assets that are in orbits, and their intersections do occur. And so thinking about the speed at which these things are traveling, we're talking on the order of 7 kilometers per second. Let me say that again. 7 kilometers per second, not hour, per second. These things are moving relatively quickly. And so an impact from, you know, you might have seen years ago where they show the effects of a paint chip on the space shuttle. A paint chip was significant in generating damage on the shuttle. So these things are really, really something that we have to pay attention to. And we are doing that, by the way.
Oh, Jamaica, there's an application in for us for this particular project. So I don't know, the time for protest has passed. Nobody has brought up any issue with it, it would appear. What would your reservation be on the use of this technology in Jamaica?
I would think that such an if approval is given for such a service to be offered in Jamaica, I think first of all we should manage expectations of persons, because while satellite broadband internet services, they do have the advantage in terms of the coverage. There's also the speeds that are realized are not yet anywhere near what you would get with fiber. So while persons would definitely benefit from increased coverage and better service relative to what they may be getting currently in some areas where there is high-speed fiber, then there definitely would still, it's not yet at the point, Starlink is not yet at the point where it is comparable to fiber. Fiber is the superhighway in a sense in terms of the capacity, how much information can be transmitted. So I think that person should be willing they should be urged to manage their expectations where that is concerned. It's not the be-all and end-all, in my opinion. There's still a need to maintain and manage terrestrial networks. It's like there's nothing like having tower or having service that is closer to you. There are different factors that impact satellite connectivity, such as heavy rainfall. So because of the great distance over which the signal is traveling, and we're talking about several hundreds to thousands of kilometers through space, the signal power does decrease over that distance. And so when it does reach Earth, it is relatively weak compared to what it was when it leaves the satellite. So the presence of heavy rainfall in large storms where there's lots of cloud cover, especially in tropical regions.
It might not deliver on what it promises.
It will probably deliver most of the time, but I think that what we would expect all of the time is not likely to be the case. And I say that carefully.
Professor, is the trade-off worth it? Because I hear your concerns, but then I hear on the other hand that it will help in terms of coverage. Is the trade-off worth it?
The short answer to that is yes. And as Dr. Harris stated, though, the real issue is in nowhere in the near future will the rates be comparable. And so The terrestrial system will simply be superior. But this will provide coverage to areas where you do not have a terrestrial network. So that's where the benefits would come into play. So you go into some real remote areas, at least you would have connectivity. That's what you would be allowed to have. Be a low data rate, but at least you have connectivity.
So
Does that make sense?
It does in a way, because I remember during COVID, one of the things we talked about is how satellite technology could allow those spaces that we were not accessing internet. That though if we fast track satellite technology, then we could see an improvement in connectivity in remote spaces.
That is correct, yes.
Right. So you're saying that the trade-off is worth it, but it might not be what we expect.
If we expect what is like to be like 5G speeds, if we expect connectivity like that will allow real-time communication, telemedicine to be performed reliably 99.999% of the time, where any slight delay can be the difference between life and death, then it may not be what we should be relying on as the main technology. We still will need the terrestrial links for quite a while.
Professor, where is Jamaica in this whole conversation about satellite technology? Are we waiting another 20 years before the big nations do their work and then we trickle down and get some of it? Are we likely, even with this application, are we likely to see any significant transformation of our communication space soon?
It depends on the investments that Jamaica wants to make. I don't think Jamaica should be investing in the satellites themselves, but I think Jamaica should be focused on the receiving end of the data. So you need, dishes and those sorts of things to receive the data that's coming from space. So if Jamaica invests in that, then the avenues are well lit for you to do things in that area. Trying to build the satellites to do this is not the way Jamaica should be doing it.
Do you agree, Dr. Harris?
I think that is a good question. I see the need for both, and both are very important. And as Prof. Fitzroy said, we really should probably be spending more time right now trying to develop the ground station part of it, or the parts that will receive that data, because the reality is that there are thousands of CubeSats, not just belonging to the Starlink constellation, but from universities, private companies that have sent up, even weather applications that have launched small nano satellites. You're talking about 10 centimeter cube, and they are in low Earth orbits, and it is possible, quite possible, to benefit from that. When we have ground stations that can receive that data, we can be one link in the chain. But on the other hand, I also see the need for some amount of understanding and research into how those satellites are designed and developed. So that's
Very good. All right, gentlemen, thank you both very much for what we see as the beginning of a conversation that we know we will need several other interventions in, but we thank you for leading us in this first part of it. Dr. Louis Ray Harris and Professor Norman Fitzroy, thank you both for joining us. We will now take a short break. CVM Live will be right back.